I'm Sabrina Siddiqui, political reporter at The Guardian in Washington.
I'm Bob Bland, entrepreneur, political activist, and co-founder of the 5 Million Strong Women's March on Washington.
I'm Matt McDermott, Democratic pollster, communications strategist, and board member of the LGBT Victory Fund.
And I'm Tamika Mallory, also co-chair of the Women's March on Washington and co-president of the Women's March organization along with Bob Bland. Join us on our very first episode of America's Midterms, The Blue Wave. On tonight's show, Steve Kling, state Senate candidate in the heart of Texas, and Paul Walker, a liberal voice in deeply conservative Kentucky. Is he brave enough to say coal's never coming back? Buckle up, because if you know anything about this crew, it's going to be a ride. Here we are, moving up. Progressives now have their very own show. Till Election Day, this is the spot for the latest with progressive candidates and races. So Matt, let's turn to you first. Just over a month until the elections. It's actually scary. How's it looking out there for progressives?
Well, before we get to that, it sounds like you both were arrested last week.
Sure were.
What happened there?
You know, I mean, I think the reality is that from Women's March perspective, we were there since the very beginning. That's the first day that Brett Kavanaugh had a hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, we were there protesting in the hearings, making sure that America is very clear that we're not okay with anyone that Donald Trump decides should be a nominee for a Supreme Court. I don't think so. He shouldn't even be president. So how dare he put forth someone to be on the highest court in a lifetime appointment? So we were there to make sure our voices are heard.
And it really wasn't just us from the Women's March. There was thousands of grassroots activists from across the nation, mostly women, who came together at a time when a lot of even progressives were saying, this is a sure shot.
Because obviously, regardless of whether he gets confirmed or not, this is going to have impacts on the November election.
Oh, absolutely.
Some pretty significant impacts. And so I think the question on the table now is this, not to be cliche, but is this an October surprise? Is this an event that can cause Democrats in particular, but I think Republicans too, to mobilize and energize around an issue in a way that we haven't seen before in this election cycle? And are we going to see Democrats, you're on the streets with them every day, are we going to see them turn this into an election issue?
What are the state of the races? I mean, let's hear that from you specifically, Matt. What are the state of the races across the country?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's important to caveat this by saying that this is an incredibly tough map for Democrats. I think if we were in different circumstances, we wouldn't be talking about Democrats having any chance to win back the House or the Senate. But I think what we're seeing over the course of the next few weeks is we've got 23 seats that Democrats have to win back in the House. We've got 2 seats in the Senate that Democrats need to win back to take control of the Senate. And we've got double that number of seats that are up for grabs in both houses. And so I think the question over the next few weeks is, can Democrats organize and mobilize in those swing districts to not only take back the House, but look at some of those competitive seats in the Senate in places like Arizona, in places like Nevada and Texas, and really give Democrats a shot at winning there as well.
Because to your point, it's a really tough map in the Senate because we have a lot of seats up on the Democratic side for re-election, but only a few on the Republican side, and they've been stalling as much as possible to make sure that Democrats can get back to their district and actually campaign.
Yeah.
So Sabrina, what are the issues though? What are people talking about?
Well, I think that that's an interesting point because from a national perspective, I know those of us in the media are constantly fixated on the latest controversy that stems from the White House.
Absolutely.
It's Russia one day, tomorrow it's something that the president tweeted that's inflammatory. But I think that on the ground, people are much more concerned with the economy, with whether or not their own personal living conditions have improved, with access to health care. I do think women's issues will play a big part in this election, especially in the aftermath of Me Too. The Kavanaugh nomination may have really made that a much more burgeoning issue. Gun control, obviously after the Parkland shooting, the organizing that you saw from the students there, that was unprecedented. So I'm interested to see whether there is very much a disconnect between what a lot of us spend our days talking about in Washington and what voters are ultimately paying attention to at the polls.
Absolutely. We're going to take a break right now, but coming up.
I'm running for Congress because I believe we learn when we listen. Because democracy works when we share ideas, working together, even if we don't agree. I'm Paul Walker. I'm running for Congress to listen to and serve you.
In a rural part of a conservative state, one progressive candidate is fighting back. Here is Paul Walker, liberal and progressive in Kentucky. Wow. A message of health care for all, protect the environment, and stop Trump's stupid trade sanctions. Have people down there had enough? I don't know. But from his campaign headquarters in Murray, Kentucky, welcome Professor Paul Walker, who will tell us all about it. So your district is all farming, and Trump trade policy is going to kill farming. Give us some insight.
Well, so this district is 35 counties. Even if they're a small city in one of the counties, there's still farming all around. And I think it's in the top 15 of all the congressional districts in terms of number of farms and farmers. And from what I've heard of farmers that I've spoken with, 1 out of every 3 rows of soybeans has been sold to China over the last several decades, and now that's gone. So soybeans prices have dropped significantly. So next year they're looking at a significant loss of income in that. And that's about it.
Let me ask you, Paul, as a pollster here, I want to get a sense of your numbers and a little bit more about the district. Obviously, it's a deep red Republican district, hasn't been represented by a Democrat in a very long time. What are you looking at in terms of numbers? And more importantly, what are you looking at in terms of mobilizing Democratic voters to get out and vote this November?
Well, our numbers are, as you know, the Cook report it goes by the past 3 or 4 elections, and there's been a 50-point difference in those elections. And no, I'm not being immodest here, but we haven't had a great candidate for this seat for several years. And in fact, 2 years ago, when it was an open seat, as I've been around, people did not like the Democratic candidate, who was the only one that stepped up. Now, one of the problems there is that we, as a state, especially in the western portion of the state, we have not been great about getting younger people involved and building a bench, so to speak, in the party. And so no one was ready to step up when our longtime representative retired, or became a lobbyist, actually, after almost 2 decades in that seat. But traditionally, it's a very Democratic portion of the state. We have a 2-to-1 registered Democrat to Republican in this district, but people have been voting Republican for a long time, although that's not true all the way down.
Well, I wanted to actually ask you, this is Sabrina here, you're talking a little bit about the dynamics on the ground, and ultimately you are trying to represent a state that voted overwhelmingly for Trump. You were talking just now about some of the impact of his trade policy and the way in which it actually goes against the interests of the very same people who voted for him. But we've seen that the people who supported him don't seem to get that message. So as a candidate, are you focused on Democratic turnout, or are you also trying to approach some of those Trump voters? And if you are, how do you do that? How do you convince them that the policies of the same president they voted for are actually hurting them?
Good question. We have a whole team of volunteers, and so we're on the ground a lot. Lots of people are out talking to specific targeted voters. But my message is primarily anti-Congress and ignoring Trump, because so many people voted for him. My message is basically that even if you voted for him, the supermajority is not doing us any good either. And so your House, your Congress, is your opportunity to make sure there's a check on these policies that damage you.
Let me jump in a little bit, Paul.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we're kind of moving you along, but we want to make sure that you cover as many issues as possible. And I wonder, what are your plans in terms of really protecting the rights of women and making sure that they're safe from things like sexual violence, which has obviously been a big topic in our nation recently?
Oh, it's a very important issue to me. In fact, yesterday I had an op-ed published entitled "Why Isn't Anyone Talking About the Violence Against Women Act?"
Yeah,
and talking about, with all these headlines about Kavanaugh, there was the renewal of the VAWA was ignored pretty much, and so it's been temporarily extended to December 7th, but it needs changes, and there are things that need to be updated on it that Republicans in Congress have ignored, and it's very important to have those resources because of that act And while this is a high-profile national case,
Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Hey, this is Bob.
Sorry.
I was wondering, because it was interesting, one of the things pre-election in 2016 that I actually found myself agreeing with Trump on was his free trade policies, because for myself as a manufacturer and a domestic manufacturing advocate, I saw him saying end TPP, and then also renegotiating NAFTA. But what we've actually seen is that these renegotiations, the sanctions, haven't helped anyone in the manufacturing community at all. How do you address that locally?
Well, for example, we have some unions, steelworkers, and we have a few aluminum plants here in this district, and they haven't changed anything. What they're seeing is the prices are simply going up, and even though they can sell more, people aren't buying anymore because the prices are so high.
So are there any innovative ways that you could create economic opportunity through your new leadership role in your community? Because you're not going to change Trump.
No, I know that. Yes, very much so. Well, what I would like to see overall is more incubation and more resources given to local businesses to grow, rather than it seems like a very big push to bring in outside businesses. And even though we're appealing, we have low cost of living and we have a good workforce here and good transportation resources. What those outside companies demand is all these tax breaks that actually hurt the local economy, especially when Kentucky advocates itself as a right-to-work state.
Right.
Yeah.
And it
What
just
about
hurts.
education? Is education a hot button issue in your community?
It is, especially expanding it to include vocational training
Right.
and changing the culture
Yeah.
so that college isn't the only pathway to success.
Yeah, and Paul, that brings up a great point and something I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, you have a lot of opposition from Republicans, not only in your district, but in the state. How do you get them to embrace this issue platform that you're talking about?
You talk about things that are the economy. That's what hits their wallet, what hits their pocketbook. State policies have recently impacted pensions of state workers and teachers. So teachers and state workers, public employees are all visibly affected. So that makes them pause about their past votes.
We're going to have to wrap it up. I just want to ask you in 30 seconds, how do you win?
We win by work on the ground, and we win by having enough resources to reach enough voters to say things can change, and you are important, that you have a voice, and that you will be represented.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate
Thank
you.
you,
We know
Paul.
we're moving you along, but we want to make sure your platform gets out there. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap it up, and we're going to be right back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Paul.
We're going to take a break for a few seconds, but coming up,
We need people with a servant's heart back in our politics. We need to be able to make people believe again. And I want to bring that servant's heart to the politics of this state.
welcome back. It may be a red state, but in Texas, one candidate's hardcore blue. Meet Stephen Kling, running for Texas State Senate, facing death threats. He's not stopping, though. He wants to end the culture wars. He wants to help with health care reform and make sure that decent jobs and decent money is for all of us. Issues that he hopes will carry him to victory. So let's meet proud progressive Stephen Kling. Live from Texas. Stephen, how are you? Death threats, I hear.
I'm doing well. I haven't had one of those in a while, but I'm thinking of actually compiling a coffee table book full of them when this is over, so I'll have something to remember this race by.
Wow, so sorry to hear that. I didn't know that they wanted to kill progressives in Texas. That's a pretty dangerous thing.
Well, let's be honest. It's not a fair characterization of Texas. This is one or two people that feel very threatened, and they're lashing out. We're seeing that nationwide. It's not something I concern myself with. I've been eyeball to eyeball with the Taliban, so those folks don't bother me a bit.
So Stephen, we want you to let your guard down a little bit over here. Can you just tell us the non-talking points version of what your campaign is really about?
Sure. Well, when we started this campaign 18 months ago, it was based upon a couple of premises, and that one was that we are not going to be part of the problem. We are here to be part of the solution. We are real people, And that meant two very defining things for us. One is that we are not ever going to take corporate money, not now, not ever in the future, however long my political career lasts. And two is that we're going to say the things that we always wish that a candidate would say. We're not putting our finger in the wind. We're not talking to consultants. We're speaking the truth as we understand it as people who have lived in the middle class and have watched the middle class start to crumble away due to economic policies both here and nationwide.
Stephen, let me ask you about that. You're obviously running as a progressive Democrat in a traditionally Republican district. How do you square those two things? How do you run as a progressive in a place that hasn't seen a progressive in a very long time?
Well, I don't know if they've ever seen a progressive, really. I mean, it's the fact of the matter is that we are a non-voting state. Midterm elections, we have some of the worst turnout in the nation, and this district in this area has some of the worst turnout in the state. We, however, see that as potential. And what we're doing is we are focusing on really all the people in the middle. A lot of times people mistake the concept of progressive as being really far left. The fact of the matter is, based upon polling on all the different issues that you've already mentioned, progressives actually give a voice to everybody caught in the middle between extremes. The 75% of people that are in favor of universal health care, who gives them the voice? Those are all of us caught in the middle here. Small business owners like myself who are embrace these ideas, not only because they're compassionate, but also because they make good business sense. If we had universal health care, for example, in this country, we would see an explosion of entrepreneurialism that we've never seen before. And that's because small businesses would not be encumbered by having to provide health care for their employees, which means they could hire more people. And people who were thinking about opening their business wouldn't have to walk away from employer-provided health care.
Well, how can you really win, though, Stephen? We're looking at the numbers here, looking at the fact that, you're not necessarily, you don't have the support that you deserve. And I want to say personally, I believe that as a progressive candidate, you should have that support. But also TV time. Just having the type of attention on your race. How do you really feel you can win?
Well, we win with grassroots, old school. We knock doors. We thought we were going to knock 40,000. We're probably going to knock closer to 90,000.
Wow.
We thought we were going to be happy with raising 200,000. We're closer to 300 right now, and hoping we'll have a really big October and 400. And we're pouring all of that into focused social media. I come from the tech industry. I've been in tech for 23 years. I guess that makes me a big geek or nerd. But that has its advantages. We know exactly how to target who we want. I'm a veteran. We have 85,000 veterans in this district, and we're going to hit each one of them every time they open social media between now and the election. We have technological savvy on our side, and we have an army of over 500 volunteers who show up and block walk and phone bank and send postcards. That's the way it works. Is you get out and you reconnect with the people.
And Stephen, what is your position on immigration given the Trump administration's all-out assault on immigrants?
Well, first let me start with scapegoating immigrants is an American pastime, unfortunately. We don't seem to learn our lessons of history. It's unfortunately something that comes up. It's an easy way to externalize the threat. That's authoritarianism 101. The way I like to speak to conservatives about this is that I look back to the words of Ronald Reagan. We need to bring everyone into the light. There has to be a clear and streamlined path, not just to citizenship, but also just to be able to come here and work. We've had these programs in the past. The sky didn't fall. The fact of the matter is, these are divide and conquer social issues that are brought up in a cynical fashion to try to divide us up to get people to vote against their self-interest. And we want to focus on the things that everyone, all the pain points that people have, which in Texas are property taxes and public education.
Stephen, when you were talking about this atmosphere of trying to divide the nation, I think you told one of our producers that you won't rule out some kind of violence or insurgency in America moving forward. What was it that you were talking about? Can you explain what you meant by that?
Oh, well, let's be real clear about that, because that the way you put it kind of made it sound like I was in favor of that or something. And let's be very, very clear. I think that what we're doing right now, and the reason we're seeing so many good candidates stand up, is that a lot of us feel we have one more shot at reform before revolt, whatever that looks like. Nobody wants that. What we want is to give people a voice. But what we have are corporate entities who don't live, who don't breathe, who don't love, who don't mourn, having a much louder voice in our democracy than we do. And we have to restore that balance, or we're going to see pitchforks and torches someday.
I want to ask you, Stephen, a little bit about Latino voters in your district. Obviously, Democrats, I think nationwide, have had a challenge over the last few years in terms of turning out and mobilizing Latino voters in places like Texas, in places like Florida. What is the situation in your district, and how are you going about talking to Latino voters and ultimately energizing and turning them out in November?
Well, you touched on it. First of all, you talk to them. I think a lot of times you don't see people coming to the polls because they're not motivated to come to the polls. They don't have a candidate that they can believe in. They don't have a candidate that gives them a voice. To some degree, we'll be very honest, I have a strike against me. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed man, and I have something to prove in that regard, but I also intend to prove it. And we've done that with considerable outreach to the Hispanic population here. And most importantly, I mean, for those of us of a younger generation, these are seamless things that we do. We just do them because of the right thing to do. We're not seeking out people that can help us consolidate power. We're seeking out people that we can help give a voice to who've never had one before. And it resonates and that motivates.
You know, just thinking, we were talking about violence. I mean, obviously, violence against black men has been a problem as it relates to police and community relations. And we all know, we've all talked about the stories, and most recently in the Botham Jean case there in Texas, where Amber Geiger killed him in his home. And, you know, there was the news report said that it was an accident, that she kind of went to the wrong home. But I think we're now figuring out that that's not, in fact, what happened. You know, what do you think, Stephen, about community relations with police? Do you have a plan on that? And is it something, are you working with grassroots organizers? And anyone else that has an opinion on it can speak as well.
Yes, and yes, we are. In fact, one of the first grassroots organizations that we reached out to here in the Austin area was related to that specifically. We work with groups like Measure Austin, for instance, that take a statistical analysis approach to these issues, but we've looked at models like community policing that actually create a precinct level board from the community that law enforcement is accountable to and works with. I think it has a lot to do from a military perspective, also with proper training. We don't see the kind of training both tactically but also mentally that police officers need to make the right call.
I hate to cut you off, but we have to go to break. But I just want to thank you so much for your time today, and good luck in November.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you again,
Thank you.
Stephen.
Take care.
Welcome back. What do you all think about these two candidates? I mean, we heard from Stephen Kling in Texas and Paul Walker in Kentucky. And to me, Matt, it seems like they have an uphill battle. But then we've seen this happen. It's playing out across the country where we think that someone might not be able to win. They actually resonate with the ground.
Yeah, look, this is the beauty of Democratic politics in this day and age. We have good candidates running in districts where Democrats have never run before and are running strong and competitive races. I think we saw from both candidates we talked to today that they're engaged with their voters, that they're talking about issues that their voters want to hear about and that matter to them. And I think they have a good shot in November.
And I think especially for Stephen in Texas, there's a Beto O'Rourke effect going on that might affect his rates and actually give him better chances.
I also do wonder, though, because we have so much focus on the prospects of a blue wave and the Trump effect, that these midterms are going to be a referendum on the president. I remember in 2016 when we were all so sure, and the media also had this narrative that there's no way that Donald Trump wins. And there was talk even about Hillary Clinton turning red states blue. She was campaigning even in states that weren't even swing states. There was talk about retaking the House in 2016 when it wasn't even theoretically up for grabs. Are we maybe overstating the prospects of a blue wave?
Well, I mean, I think it's twofold. I do think that on the ground at this moment, people are very, very, very challenged with what they see happening and that they're going to show up. You can't win without voters. And I think as long as candidates are talking directly to the people, they have an opportunity to win. I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of like up for grabs. We don't know. And the system, of course, the machine is definitely going to come into play. And we know that these candidates have big money, but we keep seeing over and over, just looking in New York with Alexandria Ocasio and how she won against Joe Crowley, who was an incumbent, and people liked him in the district. And these are actually two Democrats, right? These are two Democrats, and she still won. As a young woman who was a waitress, she was able to beat him. So if she could do it, it can happen anywhere.
I'm really worried, though, about voter suppression and the way, especially in the deeply red states where we're pinning a lot of our new hopes in deeply red states. There has been so much voter suppression in recent years, and it seems to just be getting worse.
Well, there's black and brown folks everywhere, though. So I hope that these candidates are thinking about that, because in Texas, we know that police brutality has been an issue and that we want jobs as well. And as long as the conversation is equally focused and everyone feels like they're at the table, people will show up.
And I think that's also why you're seeing such a diversity in candidates, too. Increasingly, we're seeing a lot of people of color. This is also another year of the woman, and I think you're starting to see a demand from voters that the candidates on the ballot are more reflective of the diversity on the ground in this country.
Yeah, which speaks a lot to engagement and mobilization. I think this is the first year in which we'll have Democrats going to the ballot box in places like Georgia and places like Texas, and seeing candidates that look like them and talk like them. And so I think it's a question of mobilization. We've had Democrats turn out in record numbers at rallies. We've had Democrats raise record amounts of money in districts across America. And now the X factor is, will they come out and vote at the numbers they need to win in a lot of these states and a lot of these districts in November?
But the challenge is, like, how do you see the candidates when they don't have the budgets to get out there and to get airtime? It's really, really interesting, but we'll see, you know? I mean, at the end of the day, again, if they go and knock on those doors face to face, hand to hand, we actually may turn people out. Let's see what's going to happen.
That's where it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a good show, a real good show, and I love it. I hope that Steve and Paul make it. I really do, because I think they're good guys and they have real agendas for real people. So next week, we're going to be talking about immigration, race, and what it means to be American. Two progressives will be with us, and they're going to be warning Republicans to watch out, because we are coming for you.
That's right.
Until then, thank you so much for Bob, Sabrina, and Matt, and myself. We want you to keep the struggle alive. Good night, America.